Hi, I wanted to welcome you to the Divorce Planning Podcast. I'm Carri Goldring, and I'm in the mortgage business, and I do planning pre-divorce for people who are either going to refinance their home, do an equity buyout, or plan to purchase a new home and make sure that everything in the divorce decree is worded properly and the numbers in the planning is taken care of so that you can go through the underwriting process smoothly. And I would like to introduce you to other people who are interested in the divorce planning process so you can get a real education of what's involved. Hope you enjoy.
Hi, today I have with me attorney Shalini and from Varnum, and I wanted to say hi and to welcome her. And I thought, if you don't mind, you could give a little introduction about yourself and what you do, and then we'll get into our topic.
Well, thanks, Carri. As you mentioned, I'm Shalini Nangia. I am with the firm of Varnum in our Ann Arbor office, and I have been practicing exclusively family law for many, many years now, like 28 or something. And recently in the recent years anyway, I've been also acting as a mediator. I'm also trained in collaborative divorce. And so that's what I've been busy doing.
Wonderful. And I know we're going to talk about setting up the divorce team. And a lot of times when I think divorce team, I automatically think the collaborative divorce because you're always doing a team with collaborative. You always have the two attorneys, a financial mutual, usually have some type of coach, and then ancillaries kind of come in when needed. So when you say divorce team, I know you're not only talking about the collaborative process. So will you just explain what you mean by divorce team and how you go about deciding who comes in and who you need?
Sure. And as I mentioned, I do collaborative work as well. And I think the team concept is probably a little bit more formalized since we do identify key people and they're actually part of the team in writing. But divorce work can take teams on in many fashions, and we always have to some extent. I do love working in teams, and I love to collaborate with people, even if it's not in like a formal collaborative situation, because in a lot of our cases, attorneys end up managing a lot of issues in the case, the legal issues, the financial issues, the emotional components, and that can usually work out okay, but it can be a great help to have a team around you. And one example, there's a lot of professionals that can be involved in a case. To some extent, none of them are necessary. Even attorneys aren't necessary for people to get divorced, but I would say that it's definitely a great help for people to have attorneys. And then along with that, there's a whole cast of characters that could be involved, right? Like you could have mental health professionals. You can have, certified divorce financial planners, valuation experts, mediators. So I'm happy to talk about any one of those because I have probably a list of like 14 team members that could be part of the process. And none of them are in any way necessarily required, but I think that all of them can help in different ways. One of the first, kind of team member exposure that we end up having is just friends and family of the person who's getting divorced, right? And friends and family can be great, but they can also sometimes be a hindrance because obviously your family and friends are there to support you, and everybody needs that. They need someone in their corner. And I oftentimes will have friends and family members who will sit in on meetings and be there to really kind of help guide. But sometimes it can hinder, and I caution people, like beware of your kind of best friend stories. Like, oh, I have a friend who got divorced and this is what happened. And well, my friend's divorce, the judge is saying this. And those are the kinds of situations that I think can kind of be harmful because every case is unique. And so what happened in your neighbor's case or your friend's case is not necessarily the same because your facts are different, your judge is different, the attorneys involved are different. So anyway, the friends and family are a great resource in many aspects. And sometimes you do need them there to help guide your client, to help them, gather information or just advise them or give them support. But there's a lot of other people too. And you had referenced earlier that, like in a collaborative case, we may have a divorce coach who is often a mental health professional. So I think working with a mental health professional is a huge benefit to the client and or the whole family. And that can come in many forms, right? Because you might have a personal therapist, like each party might have their own personal therapist. Your kids might have a therapist, or you may have a divorce coach who isn't working personally for anyone, who's more of a neutral, but really can kind of advise and keep the process moving in a way that an attorney might not be able to kind of, zoom in on certain issues that are going on with people, or what's really providing a roadblock to someone in terms of reaching an agreement on something. We might have a mental health professional who's a co-parenting therapist, and they are a wonderful tool when parents are having difficulties making decisions about their kids. It's great to have kind of that neutral third person who can kind of create that safe place to sometimes talk and really guide the discussion, or a family therapist who's maybe helping repair a relationship between one parent and a child. So these are all mental health professionals that I think are often part of a team that might be working with me. Sometimes the mental health professional is happy to talk to the attorneys too. Sometimes they may not want to. Maybe they're just happier working with the clients directly, but you can really talk with a therapist to kind of get some insight into what's happening. And then that can kind of guide your work as the attorney, right? Like, maybe I should approach this issue differently with my client because now I understand what's going on a little bit more with him or her.
I want to go back for a second when you said family and friends. Because I work both sides of the divorce, a lot of times I'll work with both spouses as they're trying to get in or out of different homes. Even the story of what's happening from the two spouses talking about the same instance are very different stories. So if spouse A is talking to their friend and saying this is happening and this is happening and this is happening, and the friend says, well, why aren't you doing this? Why isn't your attorney doing this? And their spouse would talk to the same friend, they wouldn't even think they're talking about the same divorce. So sometimes I think how you personally interpret your own situation is very different than the way someone else interprets your own situation. So you have to be really careful about talking about and getting advice from people who aren't professionals, that don't do this every day, because they really don't have all the facts and know all the nuances, how every decision affects a different decision and how things are layered on top of each other. And it's great to have that cheerleader support person, but maybe not the sidebar attorney who's not really an attorney and doesn't know everything that's going on. I think it makes it more confusing when someone will even call me and say, well, my friend said this and this, but my attorney said that doesn't happen that way. And I'm all confused. And I just think things get missed in the shuffle. I think things get exaggerated over time, or people forget.
And that's 100% true. And one of the issues that I run into when people are relying on their friends for advice, and perhaps getting conflicting advice from their attorney, is that, yes, it creates doubt in their mind. And again, the friend only knows bits and pieces, doesn't really know the full story usually. And they are often not understanding the realities of, well, you should just go to trial. And, there's a lot that goes into going into a trial, namely time and money and a lot of heartache. And it sounds great, like you should go to trial and, take that person to the cleaners, but they don't know the whole situation. They don't know the, kind of legal ramifications of certain things. And so
it doesn't always work in your favor, even though it makes sense to you and you think common sense wise, oh, the judge will never do this. You'd be surprised how many people get disappointed by going to court and the outcome is no way near what they thought it should be. And then they're stuck. And sometimes you get judges who aren't fair or don't know about a certain topic. Or
yeah, I would say going to court is unfortunately rarely about justice. Sometimes, it's about what can get proved in court. And I think people do often feel a little bit let down with that process. I think it's great for some people because they get an opportunity to go and tell their side. And sometimes that's all people need. But I tell people all the time, I don't have a crystal ball. Like I don't know what a judge will do, even if I think I know what could happen or should happen. You never know what could happen in court, which leads me to kind of another professional who we use quite a bit in divorces is a mediator, right? Because the mediator is that person who's the neutral facilitator. Sometimes they can be the bad guy too, right? Because when you're working with a client, my personal style is that I try to be very realistic and kind of direct with my clients. Like I'm not trying to sugarcoat things with them, but you do tend to become a part of your client's narrative a little bit. And so sometimes it's helpful to have, and the other side is doing the same thing with their clients. So sometimes the mediator is a great resource who can kind of come in and explain, the reality to both sides a little bit. And even with mediation, there's different styles of mediation. There's different timings of mediation. Some places, and it varies by county, some places are doing like early stage mediation where before you really even get into the thick of it, you might sit down and schedule a mediation to figure out, okay, what's our game plan? How do we want to approach this? What documents will we need? Other times you might be doing more of a later stage mediation. You've already been to court, maybe you've had some knockdown, drag out motion hearings and things like that. And so you might need a mediator who's maybe a little bit more directive, right? Like someone who's really going to get this family across the finish line in terms of reaching an agreement, because if not, trial is just right around the corner. So the practice can vary. I mean, we have facilitative mediation, and that is often when people are in the same room and the mediator is facilitating that discussion. More often than not, we use shuttle mediation, which is where the husband and his attorney's in one room and the wife and her attorney are in another room, and then the mediator is shuttling back and forth. And I would say that can have its positives and negatives too, but sometimes people need that separate space. But all forms of mediation, I think, are a great resource. Some judges mandate it, and other judges, while they may not mandate it, they're certainly going to be supportive of it, because that is a situation where the parties are getting to make the decisions, right? Not some judge who may or may not understand the full thing and they're going to just make a call. So I do think a mediator can be a great part of any team that you might be putting together in your divorce case.
Right. And then would you say the attitude a lot of times is, well, I can't afford all these extra people and it's only for the rich? And do you ever hear comments like that?
All the time. And to some extent, that is true. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you may not need all these team members in your divorce. And to some extent, yes, the more resources you have, the more team members you can have that could help. Some of them, I think, are kind of necessary. I mean, for example, one person that if you have retirement accounts that need to be divided as part of the marital estate, you're going to need a quadro preparer, right? Like those are not people who are going to be charging you necessarily big bucks or like by the hour. Oftentimes there's a flat fee, but most attorneys I know are not preparing these qualified domestic relations orders that are needed to divide qualified retirement plans. So you're going to need one. And that's fine. I mean, they will prepare the order that's needed to divide the benefit. But one thing that people don't think about is you can really use your quadro preparer as a resource. You should be consulting them up front because they could be telling you about the plan. Maybe there's limitations that you didn't even know about. Or they can help you with the language to include in your settlement agreement or your judgment, because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to get the result you thought you were going to get. So even though attorneys know a lot, and after doing this work for a lot of years, you do know some things about the retirement plans, a quadro preparer is a great person to have, and I think a resource that we should be consulting earlier in the process, because many attorneys just wait till the end. We have everything resolved, and then boom, oh, by the way, we need to go get this quadro prepared. But now the quadro preparer is kind of stuck with the language that's already in the agreement, right? So had you consulted him or her before, maybe you would save yourself a lot of hassle after. And that leads me to kind of my next category, which I've learned working with you, which is you could have a certified divorce lending professional. And again, you went years without ever using one, didn't even know they existed. And then when I started working with you, I learned, hey, it could be really helpful. I mean, obviously, a lot of divorces involve a marital home. Usually they're either being sold or one person is keeping them. But if I represent the client that really wants to keep the home, but we're not really sure if that's possible, I would often just send clients off and say, okay, we'll go talk to, some lender. But that lender may not really understand the divorce process, may not be really good about kind of working with clients who are going through a divorce and what dynamics that can bring. So to have someone like you in the mix who understands those divorce dynamics and the emotions, and know what other options are available. Like you're able to advise my clients about certain lending tools that are available that I didn't even know about. And then more importantly, you can tell them, well, if you want to take advantage of this, we need to have this in place, that in place. You need to have this language in your agreement. And so I know my clients that have worked with you have found it so helpful to be able to consult with someone. So that's like another team member that I've just recently started incorporating in cases. Another team member that can be very valuable yet very expensive is if you have a case that involves a business, right? Like we need a valuation of this business. And those people are expensive, but that is often one of those things where it's very complicated, right? Like you have to look at business records, you have to look at tax returns, and sometimes your attorney can manage that, right? But there are people who spend years and years learning about this and are experts in coming up with what the valuation should be on a business, or what should that business owner's income be. How do we calculate spousal support depending on what the income is? Because there's some part of the money that's income and there's some part of the money that is going to be part of the value of the business. But it's nice to have someone to be able to kind of walk us through that or read through all those documents and give us a report as to what's important and what's not important. So they are a very helpful resource, but yes, can be very expensive. And so when I have a client who doesn't have those kinds of resources, I mean, sometimes you can maybe engage them in a more limited scope. Maybe you don't do a full-blown business valuation, but maybe you can just look at certain documents that can at least get us, like what we call like the quick and dirty or the drive-by valuation. So it's important to at least talk to the valuator and see what level of service is possible. But another really key person who can be helpful in your case. And these valuation experts, often we use them for trial, but they've been a great resource even at mediation sometimes, right? Especially if both sides have an expert. Sometimes we'll just throw them in the room together and say, okay, now you two talk and like come up with something that makes sense that we can, help these parties with. So I think they're a great resource too.
There. And what about like a financial planner or like someone just to talk about dividing assets up?
I have often used financial planners, and sometimes you can find people who are certified divorce financial planners. They don't, again, have to be. I do think that's an added bonus if they are, because again, they are now trained in family law issues and they are trained in dealing with some of those family law divorcing dynamics that people may have. But even if they're not, they're a great resource in terms of financial planning, asset valuation, budgeting. For example, if you're representing the client who hasn't really been in charge of the finances or isn't really aware of the finances and is now going to be living separately and managing their own finances, it's really helpful to have them work with a financial planner who can really help them understand how to manage money. Maybe they need to figure out how to invest money. They've never had a budget before. Or maybe you have a situation where one spouse has been hiding or dissipating assets. So sometimes your financial person can help figure those things out, help locate assets. Maybe you need some advice on the tax consequences of how you're proposing to divide things, right? So it doesn't help much if you already have an agreement that divides all the assets, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, there's a tax consequence. I didn't realize that was going to happen if we agreed to this. So again, the earlier you consult with someone to understand those ramifications, the better, because that's better for the attorney, that's better for the client.
I agree with you, because you hear a lot. I don't know if you hear it a lot. I hear it a lot of, I'm not ready to talk to you yet. And even if you're not ready, you're ready, because you don't even know where your red flags are. You don't even know what you're supposed to be kind of keeping an eye out for. And if you're not ready, maybe you're not ready because you're not educated enough, and you need somebody to start educating you as to what you need to watch out for. Or I have a lot of people who don't want me to run a credit report. They're like, oh, I got to pay things off and I got to do stuff before you run my credit. Well, maybe you're wasting your money paying off credit, or maybe you're better off paying down credit and not paying it off, or learning that you're just an authorized user on an account and you can just be removed. But people always want to get ready.
But you don't even know what you're getting ready for.
They don't even know what they're getting ready for. So it's earlier the better always for anything. I think the more education you can get up front, even if you're contemplating a divorce and you don't even know if you want to go through that process or not, it's not a bad idea just to talk to an attorney to say, what does this look like? So you know what you're
100%.
getting into.
I oftentimes will consult with people who are just thinking about it, and I may never hear back from them again, or maybe I hear back from them in like 2 weeks or 6 months, right? Because that's all they wanted to know was, yeah, what does this look like if I go down this path? And so similarly, even with your housing, I mean, that's why it's great to at least find out what the options are. Or the other thing is just what will I need? What documents should I start gathering? And especially in a divorce situation, right? Because once you say you're going to get divorced to your spouse, sometimes people find that documents start disappearing, right? They were there, they were in the office, and you could have easily just gotten them, or money. So definitely better not just to consult with the attorney, but maybe, yes, consult with some sort of financial planner or with a certified divorce lending professional. I have people who even, will just talk to, real estate agents, right? Because if there's a house, we're trying to get some idea of what value everything has in a divorce, right? So a real estate agent could be someone who you can talk to, who can at least run some comps for you. Now, maybe that's not ultimately the value someone goes with, but it gives you a ballpark. Or you may need an appraisal, right? So that's another kind of team member that we work with. And oftentimes they're not a big part of our team. And they're another one where you're not like paying them hourly. For the most part, it's just you pay them for the appraisal. But they could be a team member, right? Because sometimes you'll have competing appraisals. And then I find myself actually having a lot of conversations with the appraiser, like, hey, can you look at their appraisal? Can you tell me, okay, what are the differences here? Or what did that person do, differently than you? And why would you have not done that? So these are all things that help your case, right? Because when you're in mediation or in court, you're going to have to highlight these differences to try and get some sort of resolution, or explain to the judge why appraiser A was completely wrong and why appraiser B is the one who did it correctly.
And you can't just say, my neighbor sold their house for this price, so mine must be worth it. You have to like have some good facts. And even in mediation, I feel like it's such a intense environment that if you don't have all your ducks in a row, that when you're being approached or you're waiting for a long time while the other side is being approached, some of these answers have to come pretty quick, or some of these negotiations have to come quick. You don't really have a lot of time to sit and analyze and go over stuff. And you have to be pretty ready. There's some cases I've worked on where one side will do nothing. They don't want to give a piece of paper. They don't want to do anything. So then you go to mediation and you like almost go blind. So now you're paying, let's just say $1,000 an hour or whatever it is for this mediation. And you do 3, 4, 5 hours, and all you do is leave there knowing what you knew when you walked in the door.
Right. Well, and I have to say, I mean, in an ideal world, you come to mediation knowing all those facts, right? It's very frustrating to show up at a mediation and have parties be like, oh yeah, we have no idea what our house is worth. Oh, maybe we should get appraisals. It's like, well, maybe we should have already done that and then come to mediation, right? Or, oh wait, I don't even know, like, I don't have copies of any of these bank statements. And so the idea is, like if you're doing early stage mediation where you're kind of sitting and planning these things out, that's different. But when you're coming to a mediation where your expectation is we've done our discovery and we're going to come, here's all the information. Now let's see if we can work out an agreement. It is frustrating not to have that. And I will say, you know, when you talk about team members, and I talked about you don't even necessarily need an attorney. Well, if you are going to use an attorney and you're trying to figure out who you want to use, I would suggest, you know, and I have someone come talk to me and they say, well, I'm also interviewing other people. I say to them, that's great, because you need to find an attorney. Well, number one, who you feel is competent, who actually knows what they're doing, but two, also someone who you feel comfortable talking with. And then the third component of that is, well, what style or like kind of outcome are you looking for? Because you may have someone who comes in and says, well, I want to do this all collaboratively. And so to me, that's a huge sign of like what kind of attorney they're looking for, as well as hopefully what kind of attorney is their spouse looking for. But sometimes you have people come in who are like, I just want someone aggressive. I want someone who's going to take them to the cleaners. And you know, there are attorneys who kind of specialize in that approach. They advertise that that's what they do. But sometimes if I have someone in my office who that's what they want, I really try to figure out why. Like what exactly is the outcome you're looking for? And then let me explain to you the different ways we can get to that outcome. Or let me tell you what the pitfalls are of like, let's go the aggressive route. And sometimes when you talk to people, you convince them, oh, you're right, maybe that's not the best approach. But sometimes their facts are like, oh no, like this person's going to need someone aggressive. And you know that off the bat. But as the client, when you're interviewing attorneys, I think it's good to see that you're a match with that person. And you know, when you talk about seeing if you feel like, am I finding someone who's competent? I mean, you get that by talking to them, but you can also look them up online. Sometimes there's reviews of attorneys. You can see what kind of awards they've won or what kind of publications they've done. So you get some sense of, all right, this is someone who I could work with. But I brought it up in relation to the mediation because very early on in my career, I made the mistake of showing up at a mediation. I don't think I understood that the mediation was designed to like, all right, we're going to like have all our information and settle this. And I kind of came to mediation as more, all right, like let's do some information gathering. And it became apparent rather quickly that that's not what we were there to do. And I felt terrible because, yeah, like I feel like I wasted people's time. And so
sometimes there's attorneys that you talk to them and they're really long-winded. And you have to keep that in mind because they're billing you.
Agree. And I try to be conscious of that. But you know, it's funny because I try to be conscious of that and I try to keep moving things along. But you also have to be careful because while I'm always conscious of the cost, right? Like I know what I'm billing at. So I feel bad because most clients, you know, sometimes you'll have the clients who have millions and millions of dollars, but most of the clients are just mom and pop people who sometimes are going into debt to pay me or are borrowing money from their parents. And so, but it's funny because sometimes clients perceive that as you're not listening to them or you're, you know, not paying attention. And I sometimes feel like I'm telling you the same thing like 3 and 4 times now, but some people do actually need to hear it 3 and 4 times because it may seem routine to me, but like this is the first time they're going through a divorce. And so it's not something that comes natural. And so, yes, maybe you do need to tell them a couple different times, this is what the court looks at when deciding custody or parenting time, or, you know, so it's a delicate balance. I don't want to waste people's time, but I also don't want to make it feel, you know, sometimes people will call me up and they want to talk. We are called attorneys and counselors. And in the divorce world, that counseling piece can really sometimes be used quite a bit. And I will try and suggest to people that, you know, a therapist would be much cheaper than paying my hourly rate. And to that end, I think a therapist is a wonderful resource for people who are going through a divorce. And I don't tell people that because I feel like there's something wrong with them or, oh, you must have a mental health issue. A divorce is a huge event in someone's life. It's the death of something, right? Right. And no matter whether you want the divorce or you're not wanting the divorce, your life is changing in a major way. Your kids' lives may be changing in a significant way.
Every aspect, right? Every aspect, your retirement, your savings, where you might live, what you do on a daily basis, how you think. I mean, it affects everything.
Right. So wouldn't it make sense that you might need the help of a therapist to just help you get through that? So I do feel like, and some clients already have a therapist. They've, it's not like something new that I'm telling them, but some clients, when I suggest it, they seem a little bit insulted. But I said, I tell this to everyone, not just you. And it's true, I do, because I think it's great to have that support. So I think a therapist is a great team member. But again, that's an expense sometimes for people that they can't always afford. But if you have resources, if you have insurance, some therapists do take insurance, so it's definitely something to explore. And related to that, we had touched a little bit before about even like a co-parenting therapist. As you can imagine, one of the most highly disputed areas in any divorce is the children, right? Not only what is our schedule going to be or what is custody going to be, but beyond that, like every decision, activities, expenses of activities. And those are really difficult for people to manage. It's already someone who you don't like, maybe, or you maybe don't trust them, but how are you going to now work with them to make these decisions? And there are a lot of resources. There are people who have parenting coordinators, there's guardian ad litems. Sometimes people will enlist the help of a child specialist who is usually, some mental health person typically, or maybe a social worker who can sometimes just educate a parent, right? Like maybe you need to just understand child development issues a little bit to see what kind of parenting time schedule makes sense. Because if you're planning parenting time for a 15-year-old versus a 3-year-old, there are just some child development issues that make more sense. Like it doesn't make sense to do a week on, week off schedule with a 3-year-old because they don't have the same concept of time that adults do. And they need to have, there's been a lot of research and a lot of child development specialists who have done this work who will tell you that really young kids need to have more consistent, regular contact with each parent. So maybe a schedule where you're switching off every few days makes more sense. But some parents, they don't want to hear that from their attorney, or maybe they don't want to hear that from their spouse. But if you have this kind of specialist who comes in and just explains child development through the different stages, now all of a sudden it clicks for them and they're like, oh, okay. So,
and you can't know everything. There's no way you know everything. And there's so many pieces to the pie.
I kind of know, I mean, again, doing this work for so many years, you do learn, right? I've worked with enough business evaluators that I know, a lot of the basics, or just like with this child development stuff. Like if you're in the family law world, of course, like I go to seminars, I go to trainings, I talk to different people in these different fields. I do feel like I know stuff, but I would always welcome the input of someone who that's their main area, right? That's their expertise because they obviously know more than I do.
Right, because it's their full-time job, or your full-time job is doing the law part and the facilitating, really, kind of you end up being the facilitator. But yeah, it's true. Like I would say, working in the mortgage world, I know a lot about real estate, but I don't think I could go show someone homes and negotiate that. I wouldn't be the best person to negotiate a sales contract.
100%. Although that's an area where, you don't need a realtor to sell a home. Some people feel like they can sell a home on, on their own. But I know when I was looking at houses, I'm looking at like these, offers, the sales contracts. And people will ask me all the time, oh, you're an attorney. Could you look over my contract? And I'm thinking, I'm not sure I should be the one because I don't do real estate, right? So I don't know if these provisions like need to say something differently or not. So similarly, in a lot of these different areas, I think it's best to kind of have that team. And, as an attorney, even if there's not someone who's working directly with your client, it's important to find an attorney who has those resources available to ask questions of, right? Like, even if you're not working with a client of mine, I feel like I could always call you up and say, hey, is this possible or does this work? And so as an attorney, it's important for you to have those resources as part of your team, even if they're just in the background.
Right. And I think if you have an attorney who has the attitude, I could do everything and you don't need anyone else, not always in someone's best interest either.
No.
One, you're really paying way more than you should per hour. Two, there has to be some Googling in there somewhere, right? To learn all these different things. And I love when our teams get together and I'll maybe say, well, why aren't we doing this, this, and this? And someone else will say, well, you can't do that because it is this consequence. And someone else will say, oh, well, there's this much timing if you do it that way. Oh, well, why don't we do this? And, okay, we can do that, but we got to think about this. And it always seems like you have all these intersecting, overlapping ideas, and you almost need all these different brains in the same room to figure things out.
I do think that's why I started out saying that I love working with teams and I love collaborating, because you're right. And family law, divorce work, it's not always black and white, right? There's always shades of gray, and every fact can sometimes make a difference. So yeah, I think it is helpful to have those different perspectives. Now, of course, there's always the danger when you have too many people trying to participate that sometimes you don't make any progress. And so if you have a team, or if you're working with professionals who have done this for a while, I think we can be cognizant of that. But I do think that, again, I personally am always cognizant of that. Like, I hate going into a mediation, and I have done this, where the attorneys are going to just sit in the back with the mediator and yuck it up about lots of things. And I'm always mindful of the fact that, hey, I have a client who's like paying us hourly to be here. And I think it always frustrates clients a little bit when the attorneys and the mediator are like in the back talking, right? Because they want to be part of the process. Like, that is part of the mediation, is that they get to be part of the decision making. So I think it's important for all professionals, hey, if you're working for this client, like, yes, it's great that we can talk about these things, but the clock is ticking for these people. So
right. Or they always feel like someone's talking behind their back, or trying to come up with a strategy that they're unaware of. It's a very strange feeling to go through that process.
I mean, yeah, the lack of that information is what drives people's anxiety more, right? Because and that's the one thing I hear people complain about the most, is sometimes they feel like their attorney didn't tell them, I don't know what's going on, or I don't know why we did this. And that is a lot of the time that's spent, is you do need to tell people and involve them in the process too, not just tell them this is what we're doing.
Right. It's in the mortgage business too. If I don't say we're going to processing and this is what happens, and then this is where the appraisal comes in. Yeah, I think the unknown is the scary part.
Right.
For sure.
It is 100%. And that's when your head starts, that's when you start going and talking to your friends and neighbors and reading online, like, oh, well, I read online, blah, 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 blah. And it's like,
right.
oh.
Or lately I get a lot of the ChatGPT said.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of information out there. And you know what? There's a lot of good information out there too. It just gets tricky because, especially with ChatGPT, or just even Google, I mean, you have to ask the right specific question to get the right information. And so you might get something, but it could be about what goes on in Tennessee, right? Like, it has to be very Michigan specific. And even beyond that, what we know is what a judge in Oakland County is doing is not necessarily what a judge in Wayne County is going to do, right? So you do need that kind of actual specific information, which is why I always caution people when they're telling me about what they've read or heard from someone else.
Right. It's an interesting job that you have. That is for sure. And I thank you so much for spending so much time with me and going over all this. And it's a lot for everybody to comprehend. I think you did a great job explaining it. If I have someone who wants to get a hold of you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can feel free to reach out by phone, or they can feel free to reach out by email. And so my email address is S as in Sam, H, N as in Nancy, A, N as in Nancy, GIA @varnumlaw.com. And that's one word, which is V as in Victor, ARN as in Nancy, law, varnumlaw.com. My phone number, which is my direct line, is 734-372-2928. So if anybody has any other questions about divorce or teamwork in divorce, I'm happy to field those questions.
Shalini, you're the best. Thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm Carri Goldring, and if you ever have any questions regarding mortgage, feel free to give me a call or send me a text message, 248-420-4524. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.